Everybody can hear me okay, is that correct? Okay, and can I get a quick hello from each of you just so I make sure that we're recording sound?
Hello.
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 Hi. Yeah.
Perfect, all right. And I believe Valerie is joining and we'll have her chime in too when she's ready. So, all right, from there,
I can go first. Hi, everybody. I'm Valerie Jones. I'm an alumna from the class of 1994. I was a double major in French and philosophy, and I'm currently working at St. Ben's as the Executive Director of Alumni Relations, and I've been in that position for 9 years. Prior to working at St. Ben's, I spent about 20 years in the nonprofit sector, and 4 years before that in the higher education sector in student development as a residence hall director. That was my first job out of college. So I've had a wonderful career and can tell you more about it when we get into questions. So I'll pass the baton on to whoever wants to go next.
I'll always take the opportunity to follow Val Jones. So I'm Carlene Quist, pronouns she, her, and I'm a graduate of the class of 2007 from College of St. Benedict. I studied double majors in peace studies and what is now Hispanic studies, so Spanish then, and then a minor in Latino and Latin American studies. And being able to double major and minor is a testament to student advising and amazing professors. So I'll make that plug. A few key experiences for me in college that are most important for my day-to-day life now were the arts, which has nothing to do with foreign language or culture per se, but I sang in choirs and ensembles all 4 years, and now I write music in both English and Spanish, which is really fun, and sing them with a local choir. So I would never, ever downplay the importance of the arts if that's important to your life. Also held several on-campus work positions, a couple of which are really relevant to the work I do now with young people and families. And then I'll put a plug too for my undergraduate thesis through undergraduate research was actually the underpinnings and beginnings for a Fulbright research project in northern Mexico immediately upon graduation, which led to 10 years living on the US-Mexico border and a recent reconnection with my Fulbright agency. So a few highlights. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Valerie Jones, who just joined us from across the ocean. Val, is that cool?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I think we're doing intros. As you mentioned, I'm Valerie Doze. I use she, her pronouns, and when I was at St. Ben's, I studied biochemistry and German. I graduated in 2021. And so I'm currently in Germany, also doing a Fulbright experience. So I'm doing biochemistry research on COVID replication mechanisms. So I was really able to combine both my majors, which was super exciting. And so as other people have said, like the double major, minor is a really great setup, definitely. And some other experiences while I was on campus, I was part of the German club. I worked for both the German and chemistry departments as a TA tutor. And I was also involved in climate justice club a lot. And yeah, I don't know if there was any other intro questions that I missed. Or if someone
That
wants
sounded
to
great,
go
Val.
next.
I don't know if Ethan's right there, but that sounded great, Val, in terms of our instructions.
Yeah, that was great.
Thanks.
I can jump in. Hi, some of you probably know me. I'm sure if I could see faces in the audience, I'd recognize some, but I can't see it. It's very small on my screen. I'm Amy Larson. I'm the humanities librarian here on campus. So in general, I work with English, history, philosophy, and then all the languages and cultures departments. So I was a 2014 grad. I double majored when I was here in English and French. I studied abroad in Cannes, and that was really useful. Both, I was kind of the French club president at that time. I was sort of the student coordinator of the program at the time.
And then I also got the opportunity to work with a family locally and do tutoring for one of the students there. So that was a really, really useful opportunity. So if there's any kind of fun things like that, if you guys study abroad, those are really helpful. I am a librarian here. I used to work in a couple of different roles in various public libraries. And so as far as the languages, that's been sort of the most direct connection, is just being able to use it sometimes with those people and use it with my current job, but also just sort of the understanding the very huge variety of different people that you work with, especially in a public library setting. So yeah, I can pass it to George. I think that's covered a few of the questions and you can ask more later.
Awesome. There's some tough acts to follow there. I'm George Dornbach, class of 2018. My pronouns are he, him. And I ended up creating my own major in storytelling they let me do that, which was really kind of them. And minored in Japanese. And I kind of chose that path just as I was trying to figure out what I was really interested in. And there's so many, as you know, like great classes and experiences and things that you can do at these schools. And for me wanting to take it as much advantage as I could of that opportunity, it was to combine all these things. And the thing that threads it all together, and that has been kind of the common thread through my life. I grew up overseas in South Korea and Japan, and then ended up coming here for college. And that common thread is story, our stories and the stories that we share and how we share them. And so that just seemed like a natural way to do that and become a storytelling major. I was some highlights of my college time. I lived in eco houses. I was in Toll House, and I was in Extending the Link, a videographer and editor with that. I was on the peer resource program, which so many highlights there. I worked kind of in conjunction with Valerie Jones through institutional advancement, doing some graphic design work through 4 years there. And I worked at the Common Ground Garden, which is off to the edge of campus, which I don't think is no longer a CSA, but worked there for a summer. Great time with the nuns and the sisters, and studied abroad in Salzburg. And also did the Gary Eichten NPR News Fellowship one summer, which then connected through the fall, and got to work up in the studio up at St. John's at the campus there. So yeah, and currently, so after graduating, I did the JET program, used my Japanese, went over there, back to where I went to high school, and that was fantastic. Came back here to Minnesota and worked with a nonprofit called Youth Frontiers. And then COVID happened, and now I am doing children's ministry at a church in Edina. So there, I yield my time.
Wonderful, thank you all very much. Great intros, and I know we could go hours just to delving into those stories that were highlighted in just the brief introduction. So with that, I think to get kind of the minds and questions primed here, I'd be curious to, and I think you each made reference in some way, shape, form, or another, but if you could briefly, and again, so you know, we only have about maybe 40 minutes left, I think, in the time. So I want to make sure that we honor that time with each of you, sharing as much as you can. Maybe if you could just briefly share your why into pursuing your particular language that you did, or languages, and how your study of languages and cultures while at CSBSU kind of prepared you personally and professionally for life, where you're at now. And I know those might be big questions, but if you could kind of share a little kernel of insights on each of those. And you can popcorn however you like.
I can go first, I guess, because mine is maybe the strangest answer. I always kind of joke that I majored in both my majors on accident, which to me is that I just took really huge advantage of sort of the liberal arts style of classes here. I was very fortunate to come in with a bunch of credits, and so I just kind of took whatever I thought was the coolest and sounded the best. And one of the best pieces of advice was which faculty, like asking people which faculty are the best, sort of regardless of major. And you can get some really, really interesting classes that way. And so I took a bunch of different classes and I put off declaring basically as long as possible. And my advisor finally, it was like, I don't know, junior year, they're like, you should decide. I was like, but do I have to? And so at that point, I had the most English credits. And so I ended up with an English major. And then I studied abroad in Cannes, and I came back and I think I needed maybe the capstone only to have a French major because I'd already decided on a French minor. And so that's how I came to it, and just was really involved in a lot of the French programming. Like I said, the French club, even as a declared minor. And so for me, it all just kind of came together very naturally, that I was able to take all the things that I was really interested in, and they all pieced together very logically for me. Again, kind of touching on Carlene's about the arts, right? Everything does connect. I'm the humanities librarian. I'm going to say that forever and always. And then as far as helping, I also kind of how it's helped in my career path. There's obviously the very direct, I work with the languages and cultures departments here on campus. But also I kind of alluded to in my previous answer is just the like sort of way of thinking that comes about when you have to make your brain work that way. Similarly, I can tell stories about, I'm a big tech person. I like my video games. The first time I took computer science classes, your brain doesn't work like that always. And I had some troubles, right? And so getting it to like shift a little bit is a really useful skill set, and it gives you a lot of patience and a lot of like, I don't know, sort of adaptability, et cetera, right? And again, like I said, in working with different communities, in all different, right? Again, at the public library is the best example, people with disabilities, visible and non-visible, different cultures, different backgrounds, immigrant, non-immigrant, et cetera, right? Like the list goes on and on and on, and you're just able to like come to that with patience and like openness. And I do attribute a lot of that to like the language, the culture learning, that I consider that to be a pretty good skill that I have. So I don't know if popcorning, I feel like selecting popcorn is easier. So maybe, Carlene, I referenced you. Do you want to go next?
Thanks, Annie. Sure. I was inspired by my high school Spanish teacher who helped me study 5 years of Spanish in 3 years, because once I got a hold of it, I was like, oh, I really like this. And I thought I wanted to follow in her footsteps in a way. And so I came into St. Ben, St. John's very determined to become a Spanish teacher. So study education and the Spanish language and culture, or cultures, and Spanish language dialects and traditions. And after my first semester in the education department, I thought, I'm not cut out for that. Like, that's not where it's at for me. I have tremendous admiration for educators in the classroom and outside the classroom. So then I had this 18-year-old, 19-year-old existential crisis of like, what am I doing with my life? And realized it was okay to just take some courses. And a high school friend of mine who was at St. John's at the time was like, try peace studies, Carlene. I know you from speech, like just try it. And that ended up being my academic and like social justice home during my 4 years. So that's how and then I really wanted to continue with the Spanish language. I knew I wanted to study abroad, and I was able to do that in South America, in Chile. Ethan, I'm going to jump ahead to a question because I know that a lot of people are going to be able to talk about how it prepared for personal and professional life. But in terms of career path and what the relevance for understanding Spanish language is, basically as an English speaker and Spanish speaker, language and culture is a way that I experience and understand and truly interact with people and the goings on in the world. And what I would add is that I can do things with my knowledge and skills that aren't language-based, you could say, but that are always embedded in culture, because I comprehend and interact through two languages. And I want to echo what Annie said, because those two languages, my brain operates in those two linguistic worlds, I really develop and practice an appreciation for languages and learning, including languages I don't know. And so an example of that is in January and February, when Minnesota welcomed dozens of families who had been evacuated from Afghanistan. I don't know any Pashto or Dari. I learned a few words here and there in working, helping welcome those refugee families. but I found that when I drew upon my experiences learning Spanish and being immersed in a country where the language spoken wasn't my primary language, I was in a mental and emotional space to understand what these individuals, children and adults, may be experiencing for the first time, which impacted my ability and I think made me more able to work through speaking through a translator and just counting and understanding where kids are at, and appreciating how kids often become translators for parents and interpreters. And so there's no way, if I were to sum up all this, there's no way that studying language and culture and coming to the world through those skills isn't relevant. It opens doorways that being a single language speaker doesn't. I'm going to pass over to Valerie again. In Germany. Oh, there's two of them. Valerie in Germany. Yes, Valerie Doe. Oh my God, that's the two best Valeries in the world. Valerie Doe's.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll answer this question, and then if I pop out, I'm running an experiment, so that'll be why. But yeah, I started out at St. Ben's as a German minor, and then it wasn't until I studied abroad, also in Austria, in Salzburg, that I switched to a major. Because I knew I didn't want to be done learning the language and culture, and I would have finished my major or my minor during study abroad. So I added that, which was a really great opportunity that we have the major and minor option. And then from there, I studied German in high school, and I was always interested in it. But then in college, I realized just how much it relates to my future career goals, in terms of Germany has really strong scientific research, specifically in the basic sciences. And then I'm also interested in the intersection of global health and climate change, and kind of international US-Euro policy on that, or US-German policy specifically. So really being able to kind of merge that and look at some of Germany's policies and science-based policies, which they have a lot of, has been super exciting. And so I think that's something that I'm looking forward to. And then also with Fulbright and some other fellowships that I applied for, you can see there's just a lot of opportunities, not just in the US, but globally, which other people have spoken about. But there's just a lot of options out there, and being able to actually go to the country and speak the language and immerse yourself in the culture is an amazing experience that you just don't get when you stay in the US. And so it's really cool that there's these programs and these opportunities in addition to study abroad. And so, yeah, those were some of the main ways I got into my major, and how I'm trying to merge both of them, both of my majors, but they ended up merging really well, regardless. So yeah, I will pass it off to the other Valerie.
And thanks, Val. If Annie's choice of major was an accident, mine probably began almost at birth. No joke. I learned to count to 10 in French in first grade. Miss Doyle, my first grade teacher, taught us to count to 10 in French, and I was hooked. And I knew in first grade that I was going to major in French when I came to college. And I did. So, and my mom's like, well, maybe you should also pick something practical to support your love of French. And so I also picked philosophy, which has been infinitely practical. So if you love the liberal arts, it is a very practical choice for a professional life that is satisfying. So I highly support your choices. How it has prepared me, it has been really a world expanding experience that has created, I think, an ease, an ability to kind of move speedily through transitions, and a fearlessness, an openness in being able to kind of work across differences, an openness to kind of being uncertain. There have been a few delightful places where French speakers have popped up in surprising ways. In retail instances, for instance, where a French-speaking family was there and the person working in the store could not communicate with them, and I, as a fellow shopper, could, and so we had a delightful exchange. I mean, so there's been surprising places where the language skills have been infinitely helpful, just as a good neighbor experience, and those have been delightful ways. But having the cross-cultural experience of studying another culture and having some technical skill and another language ability certainly has created, as my colleagues have said on the panel, a difference in the way our brains work, right? And it has created an ease, a fearlessness, and an openness in my ability to kind of navigate how the world works. And that has certainly aided in my ability to kind of pursue different job opportunities, different fields, different areas of study, and apply a different kind of skill set, I think, that that is undervalued and underappreciated, and highly sought after in today's employment settings. So the kind of things that employers are looking for and aren't necessarily articulated in position descriptions today. So that is something that hands down, I would say, has been one of the greatest gifts of my my study of French at St. Ben's and St. John's. George, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, I really echo all of what these awesome people have said. And I would say my journey, I alluded to it before, but I grew up, spent most of elementary school, all of middle and high school abroad. And my parents are both teachers, Benny and Johnny. And we lived in South Korea and in Seoul and in Tokyo. And so growing up, I had an appreciation and just really thankful for my time there and all that it taught me and all the things that it opened in my brain and in my heart, and just bringing that to CSB SJU and having a place where I could further that was a big reason why I chose to come here. And so yeah, that kind of had the language appreciation and wanting to continue that further with the awesome experiences that are offered. And then yeah, in terms of how it's kind of continued on, I would say I haven't necessarily had a linear path of career, and I'm still trying to figure out what are the things that interest me and how do I build that, weaving the story, you know, through that storytelling major. And that's the exciting part, I think, about a liberal arts education as well, and about languages and cultures and studying that, you know, all these experiences, the things that you're learning, they do carry with you. And like Valerie said, they're immensely sought after. And for those who are unsure of what, you know, what are the lanes that they could fit into, they do fit into lanes, and people are appreciative of that. And even just, you know, coming back from Japan, from the JET program, being able to speak Japanese over there was immensely helpful, to travel around the country and to work with a school of high schoolers who don't really want anything to do with you, but you can give them a little bit of something, and they'll give you something back. To then coming back here and traveling around the country with the nonprofit I work for and going into different schools and different communities every single day. And although not necessarily using my Japanese all the time, although there are instances where there's someone who speaks Japanese or Korean, and it's those little like, oh yeah, those little wins. But it's still different cultures and communities that each place brings, no matter where you are, that these experiences are immensely helpful.
Terrific. Not that anybody else could do that, but I think, George, I'm going to have you go last this time, because you have just such a way of wrapping it all together and such a great your storytelling. I think those are wonders. But no, thank you all really for sharing those insights. I want to open it up to the classes here to see if there are any questions from these folks. If so, I might be spinning out there. I have more we can go off of course, too, but. Okay, I think they're all kind of mesmerized right now by the world travels and exchanges. And So why don't we, if we could, we have probably, and I know Valerie, I think Jones, I think you might be having to sign off soon, but so before you can leave whenever you need to go, of course, and we do thank you for being here very much. But maybe we'll have you start with this. If you have a minute, but if you could all give, we have probably about 20 minutes left, 15, 20 minutes left. So what would be, and I'm not sure, we got a wide variety of courses, there are people in different courses here, I think, whether they're in their first semester or the third semester or maybe continuing. What would be a key piece of advice in terms of, because I heard it in some of, all of you have, mastered some of your languages, of course, now, what would be, there's always, when you're working towards mastery, there's always that key point where you're teetering on this edge of, yeah, I think I'm done. Or if you can push over that hump and boom, then it just starts to really flow, right? And now, George, I know you have a different experience too, growing up, speaking different languages, but really what all of you have is that, what's that piece of advice that you could give to these students in terms of helping push over that hump in terms of studying your languages and continuing to pursue that, because you've already highlighted some wonderful benefits of doing that. And Valerie Jones, if you wouldn't mind going first on that, that'd be great.
Sure. I was never probably the strongest technical French speaker. It was always, and my written French grammar was, God bless her, Vera Tyson, one of my favorite professors, spent hours and hours with me, and I struggled mightily with my French grammar in the written format. It was hard. It was real hard. So a couple little nuggets of advice is just keep going. Just literally keep going, and keep at it. Practice does make perfect. And it doesn't really matter how many mistakes you make. Just keep going, because the effort always pays off. And and this is a little cryptic, and it comes from a Buddhist teaching, but so the phrase is, to escape suffering, create a bigger container, right? So like if you're struggling with something, just put it in a bigger pile, right? So like if French grammar is really, really hard, add art to it, add music to it, add love of the place of France, right? So then grammar isn't the thing that consumes you, right? Like you have love of the whole culture to sustain you through the really hard parts. So, and that wisdom works kind of throughout a whole lifetime. Like you just make it a bigger container to get through the hard stuff. And that love and study of culture, it's just a great life lesson. But it really was the study of culture that brought me that wisdom. So that's the advice I would share, is keep going. And when you're struggling, just put it in a bigger container. So best of luck to you all. Keep going.
That's awesome.
I can go quick. So I was just going to say, building off that, I think, like you said, just keep going. And I think just being okay with making mistakes is a big part, which sounds easier than it might be for some of us. So just acknowledge that you're going to mess up a lot, and that's okay. And then just really be okay with putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, where, you're speaking with a native speaker, or anyone who's a better speaker than you, and you're like the weaker speaker. So just be okay with that. And then also going off of like adding things that make you enjoy it. Also in terms of outside of class and kind of like the more technical studies, try to add things like watching shows in that language, without the English subtitles if you can, and listening to music in that language, and just those type of things that you can kind of do that more when you're relaxing, and it's not like a course or homework or anything. But that's really helpful. And I think a lot of people I've heard do that when they're learning English. So it's definitely something that I'm trying to do more of. And then just, I think, yeah, trying to find those people you can actually speak with. It can be hard depending on the language to find people in the US, but if you just, take some time, seek someone out, it's really nice, really helpful. And, you can just get a coffee or get dinner or something fun. So, yeah.
I can go next. My advice is going to come a little bit more from my professional interest, but it'll repeat because I think Ethan's point of like often language learning can feel like you're doing really well, and then you just are like, this is my level. Like I just live here now, right? Like this is as much as I know, and this is as much as I understand, and this is as good as my accent's going to get, and it feels very plateaus. And then like for me, it always was very just sort of like surprise. All of a sudden, I like hit another, like I felt like I was up a level. And to me, that kind of jumping off Valerie's comment is had a lot to do with diversifying how you're coming to the language. So again, study abroad is really useful. You're speaking with people all around you that speak that language in various accents, have different levels of ability with it. If you're in Cannes, because it's a collège, the collège is for international students to learn French. But kind of like she said, like that can come from a lot of different places, right? Music, movies. I keep talking about video games. I have the Twitch streams that I watch in French, right? Like you can find these all over the place. And so like doing, and there is again, science behind that of just like coming to it from different ways, giving your brains different ways to process things. Because kind of like first Valerie said, not everything works for everyone, right? That being said, I would encourage you to not abandon any part of the language. It can be really easy to just speak, and like that is how we interact with the language. But that often to me is sort of where those plateaus happen. And so reminding yourself every so often that like, okay, I do need to do some writing. Maybe I'll just brush up on grammar a little bit, different things like that. Because again, like, they talk about vocab, you lose vocab really, really fast, right? You lose some of that stuff pretty easily if you don't use it regularly. And so if you can, don't abandon some of the more technical parts of it. Those create sort of the structure that are really, really useful to help us remember, so.
Annie, yes, about not just speaking. That's the most comfortable part for me. Ironically, maybe because I was really good at reading and writing, like that's what I got the best grades in, especially in college. And then I was embarrassed to speak because I would make a lot of mistakes. And then, as all the panelists have said, and I'm sure George will echo too, like that's how we learn. It's not how we get the best grade, but that's how we learn. And spoiler alert, even if you go to grad school, the majority of your life will not be graded on a A, B, C, D, F, or out of 100% scale. And so that's your life right now, but that's not most of your life. So it's good to be able to not think of language just in those terms, even though that is where you're at right now. So what I would add is really think about like, what are you learning? And this is in your language classes, and how you're learning, and then how is that applied to the world? I like the quote that Val said about putting it into a larger container. I would also say, like, what are the most important aspects of classes and all that you're experiencing at St. Ben's and St. John's? Like, give yourself time to think and reflect, whether you journal, bullet journal, whether you type, and also talk with people who aren't in your majors or minors. I know once you get into like junior or senior year, when you do declare, I spent much more time than not with Hispanic studies majors and also peace studies majors. And my friends in the sciences were like, I don't ever see you. I was like, well, I don't ever see you. You're in the lab all the time. What's up with that? But like, I've learned so much from friends who are pharmacists who also learn Spanish. I've learned a lot through friends who have been like math majors and German majors. Like Angie Schmidt-Whitney has become a really good friend, and she's an XPD, and like learn math and German. So outside of your major and minor, talk with others. If a way that your brain makes sense of the world doesn't make sense to someone else, close friends or trusted friends will be like, yeah, I don't get it. And then it's like, oh, then it's my turn to either refresh how I articulate something, or realize that the way I'm coming to at the world, whether it's through speaking Spanish or working with families from Afghanistan, or supporting college students through, especially historically underrepresented college students through their experience, and launching into early career, probably I need to rethink some ways that I'm limited, even though I think I'm really expansive with the language. So reflect, and talk with others. Get out of your own head and get out of your own majors or minors, is advice that I would give. That's advice that has served me well, especially when I'm most resistant to it. And so probably the fact that I'm saying it now is an indication that I could take my own advice. And with that, I'll bring it to George for a lovely summation.
Well, I would say, I did grow up overseas, but I think Limpato Sensei would attest. She's very kind, so maybe she wouldn't attest, but I had a difficult time in Japanese class, but she stuck with me. And I would say that she pushed me so much to continue studying and to keep at all those different aspects, because it's so easy to get comfortable with, I can speak pretty well. Drop me on a street of Tokyo and great, let's go for it. Perfect. But that continual learning, and what that comes back to, I think, is just being curious. Like Carlene said, and Annie also said, and Valerie too, just all those different ways that you can experience, take in, and appreciate the languages, the cultures that you're learning about, and that all these people at CSBSJU are also learning about through their different lenses and their different stories, is important. And you're here for a set amount of time. Take all that in, be curious, ask questions as much as you can.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And Valerie Doze, I know you're signing off, so thank you very much, Dankeschön. Be well, and thank you for joining us from across the pond there. For the remaining folks, I want to just wrap up, as we got about 10 minutes left, and I think I don't see a hand raised, but you're more than welcome to raise many if you do want to. Any questions from folks in this? Again, I think they're mesmerized, but I don't want to cut anybody off. Burning question you have? No? Okay, that's all right.
Ethan.
Yes,
Ethan, I have a burning question.
Wait, you're not allowed to ask questions. You're just
surprise. I know I like subverting the process. You know this from being my coworker. So would you just be willing, Ethan, to do it like a show of hands, kind of who's a first year, who's a sophomore, junior, senior, and like languages that are in the room? That might just help us kind of understand going forth, like what might be relevant to share for panelists. Is that okay?
So I know, yes, in terms of languages we have in the room, we do have courses here who are studying Japanese. We also have courses studying Hispanic studies, and then French as well, and a couple courses there, I think. And I believe that is it. Do we have others from any other languages here? German, we do. Oh, thank you. Good. All right. And then how about a hand first years? All right, good. All right, and then how about sophomores? Okay, and how about juniors? A couple of you, all right, and seniors? All right, a couple of you there too. Good, all right, so you see that mix. So as here's one, I do have a burning question for you folks, if you could. We're talking about languages and cultures, and you all referenced some different elements there. And I think one thing I thought that was just really powerful, that really I think helps in, I think, the retention and the study and the loving of the language is the delving into the culture and finding something that sparks you in the culture, right? The bigger picture. So could each of you speak to maybe one thing briefly that in each of your and I know you probably, being probably a lover of languages and such, that you probably have many cultures that you're interested in, but in the culture specific to your language that you have studied, what is one thing that from that culture that really sparks you, that drives you, whether it's art, music, food, and be specific, you know, if you would. And again, probably we're wrapping up here, and I want to respect your time as well as the courses here in the next about 7 minutes. So, George, let's have you go first, please.
I'll start it off. Perfect. Yes. Something specific to Japan and Japanese culture. When I was in high school, I had a Honda Super Cub, which is a little 50cc scooter. And when I went back to Japan through the JET program, and I was on a little island called Awaji, and I had no real transportation to get around. There's not a lot of public transportation there at all. And I was just like walking around town one day, and I saw out of the corner of my eye this old 1995 Super Cub, and I went into the shop and asked the guy, and ended up buying it. And I took that thing around the country, about 10,000 kilometers that year that I was there. And it was, again, just an amazing way, with the help of my Japanese learning and continual study at CSPSJU, to be able to get out into the countryside and to communicate and meet up. And you meet other people who are riding on a Super Cub on these little scooters through the hills and the mountains. And they're like, what are you doing? What's going on out here? Come ride with us. Let's join. So then you end up changing courses of your trip and your plans, and you go stay at their houses in the mountains, or you go hop on a ferry with them to, you know, continue your adventure. And just opened up my world and appreciation. I feel like there's so many niche things in Japanese culture, which I love and appreciate that. Just the things that you can really get into, and the people who appreciate their Super Cubs and their sense of adventure, but then also that community of openness and curiosity that I experienced while I was over there, is something that now, since being back and working with some of my friends who are still over there, hopefully this summer we're going to put together a company and do some scooter tour, a little scooter tour business. So just bringing friends over to experience Japan in a unique and different way that is safe and often not done. So
that's great.
That is such a specific answer, and I don't think I have anything that's specific. Growing up, I think for me, well, I'll do two. Growing up, I was always an art kid, and so just the art culture that comes out of France is just wild, like just the various different movements, and I've always spent a lot of time studying them, and just like being able to see, I'm a big museum person, so like being able to see them in person, things like that. So that was always one that kind of was like a consistent thing for me throughout my life. And then I am a languages person just in general. Like I really am fascinated by the things people can do with words. Internet linguistics is really interesting to me. So my thesis, my final project was a translation of poetry. And so I really enjoy, French is a more sparse language than English to begin with. And then adding that to the very intentional way they go about people go about poetry in general. I really enjoy, I've always really enjoyed French poetry, so.
Wow, I want to like read your poetry translations, Annie, and like travel around in a scooter. Oh my gosh. I'm going to take this a different direction. Annie and George, you gave such like visceral examples, which was really fun. I'm impressed by and humbled by how language continuously evolves, continuously. And that's an uncomfortable thing in college. Like grammar evolves much slower, vocabulary also, but to a lesser degree. And like, there's definitely, on a lot of language exams, even if there's like a open-ended response, there's a right and a wrong way, typically to answer a question. But when you're out of the classroom, there are so many right ways to communicate and to understand. There are so many words, verbs, nouns that can be used in different situations. And I appreciate how language, just like culture, is local and regional, not just national. So, for example, when I lived along the US-Mexico border in Southwest Texas, specifically in El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, or Juarez in northern Mexico, I learned a lot of Spanglish. And then when I spoke with Spanglish, I use it a loose term, but a lot of people adopt that as what they say, so that's not pejorative at all. When I returned to Minnesota and spoke with professors, especially in high school teacher, they're like, "Carlene, what happened to your Spanish?" And I was like, this is my daily life. And then when I spoke more academic Spanish, working with a lot of like high school students exploring college whose families speak Spanish, and the high school students and college students are very much bilingual or trilingual. I'd have families remark like, "Your Spanish is better than mine." And I'm like, oh no, I started learning the language in multiple cultures when I was 15. There's no way that my Spanish, quote unquote, is better than someone who's been hearing it since the womb or since birth or very early on. And those were clues that like language continuously evolves, and so do the places where we are. It calls for different kinds of expression and different kinds of whether it's like High German or Low German or different kinds of vocabulary. Like, it's humbling, and I appreciate that so much, because I never feel like I'm done learning Spanish. I never feel like I'm done developing, and there's no kind of there's proficiency, but I would say no kind of permanent mastery, because language is always evolving, and it gives us great adventures like translating poetry and going around a country on a scooter, and like there's like no set destination for either of us, or any of us. That's how I would kind of wrap that up.
All right, well, that is just I can't even top that off. I'm just so appreciative of you being here today. Thank you all for the courses and the classes and the professors being here. Domo arigato, merci beaucoup, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. And I hope you continue your journeys and telling your stories and connecting people together. So thank you on behalf of XPD, Alum Relations, and all of us at CSBS JU.